All right, as people continue to log on and join us, I'm going to go ahead and just kick things off. First, by welcoming everybody, saying thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited to have you. My name is Josh Clark, and I'm the head of school at Landmark School. If you're not familiar with Landmark, we are an independent school in Beverly, Massachusetts for 2nd through 12th grade students, both boarding and day, specializing in students with dyslexia and related learning differences. We are so excited tonight to be able to share with you the expertise that guides so much of what we do. And as an institution dedicated to the science of reading and ensuring that all learners have access to what they need to be successful. We are so enthralled and fortunate that as part of our Landmark Learns series, we have kind of our first inaugural research expert extraordinaire joining us tonight. So I'll share a little bit more about Landmark Learns before the evening is over, but this is an opportunity for us to educate our community, certainly our parents, but also a much broader swath of folks who might have an interest in understanding more about language-based learning differences, reading, the science of reading, reading instruction. So we are so glad to be able to work with you all and offer that. And again, as I mentioned, tonight we are so grateful, so privileged, so honored that for our inaugural our kind of research lecture, if you will, we have Dr. Nicole Patton. In a moment, I will formally introduce Dr. Patton and talk about the amazing work that she does. But I have to tell you a fun story. One of the first times I ever knew Nicole, not only is she one of the world's leading experts in the science of reading and thinking about how we can make access to reading equitable, she's also insane. Because the first time I met her, she petted a cheetah. We were actually together, and she petted a cheetah, and then I'm not joking, then she went into a lion's den and played with what were supposed to be baby lions, but they weren't very babyish. And meanwhile, I was behind a fence crying, thinking that Nicole was going to die. So not only is she a pioneer in this field, she is a pioneer in adventure. So again, I'm so excited to have her. I am and Nicole, forgive me, but a dyslexic man is now going to read your formal bio. So we're going to do our best with this, but I know I'm in good company. So in addition to being an amazing person and my friend, Dr. Nicole Patton is an academic researcher and leader who champions struggling learners. She is a professor of education in the School of Teacher Education at Florida State University, the director of the Florida Center for Reading and Research, and the director of the Regional Education Lab Southeast at FSU, and we are so delighted and honored to have her tonight. We are recording this presentation, so those of you that have registered, we will make a recording of it available later on. And in addition, throughout the evening, if you have any questions, at the end, as time is available or allows, we'll try to run through some of those questions with Dr. Patton, and you can add those to the Q&A. So don't put them in the chat, put them in the Q&A, and we will, again, as time allows, try to address some of those. So with that said, it is my honor and my privilege to turn things over to Dr. Nicole Patton.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for welcoming me into your community. Josh and I can share some fun stories about hanging off the side of a mountain one day. But it's funny, my husband and I were talking about petting a cheetah the other day, and I think we've come to believe that we are just adventurers at heart, which is kind of what you need to be in this space and to do this kind of work. It takes a lot of bravery. And so I think I'm in fine company here. I'm going to share my screen so that I can deliver this presentation to you all. So, you would think after many years of COVID that this would be a much more seamless process for me, but I, like everyone else, still fumble with it a little bit, but I'll get us there. Okay. And so hopefully what you see is the actual presentation slides. Josh, you want to give me a thumbs up that that's what they see, the actual presentation slides? Perfect. All right, so I'm going to talk to you today about delivering on the science of reading for all learners. And I thought, given the focus of our discussions, especially in this month as we celebrate Black History Month and we're spreading all of our learners, I thought it'd be nice to focus in a little bit more closely on issues associated with students with dyslexia and literacy difficulties among our most vulnerable and diverse student populations. So I'm gonna streamline this a little bit, and I certainly welcome all your questions and I hope this piques your interest and helps you not only learn, but creates a questioning mindset for you where you wanna know more. That's my goal here. So let's start with words. Words matter. Words are very important. And I think it matters that and whenever you give a presentation like this, and especially if you're having a discussion from afar, I wish I could be physically in a room with you. But since we're from afar, I thought it's important let's make sure that we're all on the same page and we're talking about the same things, because words do matter. And specificity matters as well, especially when we're talking about addressing the needs of children with disabilities, which I know we all in this room, virtual space, hold near and dear to our hearts. But it also matters in this case because words have often been used to create sort of an us and them separation between the different groups of students that we are so concerned about serving in our schools and our communities. And I think sometimes that reinforces unintended inequities that are really difficult to overcome. We continue to struggle with them, but if we can come together and understand each other better, I think we can move all of our children forward. So when I say dyslexia and literacy, let me tell you what I mean. I mean what I'm sure many of you in this room would agree with. Dyslexia, as we commonly think about it, is a brain-based neurological reading difficulty that has a lot of heritable traits, tends to run in the family. It's common and a lifelong condition. Students who are struggling with dyslexia tend to struggle with that condition throughout their lives. A hallmark of this condition is that there's this unexpected difficulty learning to read, that despite access to lots of resources and really solid instruction, supportive families, and resources within our homes and communities, that nonetheless children are struggling with reading, and it's something that we just can't quite understand how this could happen. So there's this unexpected difficulty. Typically associated with language processing, and in particular in the phonological domain. And so we hear people use the terms dyslexia, but we also hear reading disability, we hear learning disability, depending on the space that you're in. And when I'm talking about literacy, I'm really talking about in this specific talk around those specific skill sets that are necessary to read the words on the page, right? So word reading and spelling skills, the ability to sound out and read that word and or spell that word. I'm talking about advanced reading skills as well, that these foundational skills in word reading and spelling support us towards more advanced word reading skills, toward more advanced text reading skills, towards comprehension and fluency. And yes, even writing. We don't talk about writing as much as I think many of us would like to, but often students who are struggling with reading have difficulty with writing as well. And so we're also thinking about things like text composition and sentence composition as well, genres, things of that nature. And we're also thinking about oral language, because we understand that all of this, underlying all of this, foundational to all of these skills, is children's oral language skills. Now, what do I mean when I say vulnerable and diverse student populations? Well, to be clear, vulnerable is not synonymous with diverse. It's not and diversity is not synonymous with minority either. When I'm talking about children who are vulnerable to experiencing difficulty in school due to conditions that are sometimes inside and sometimes outside of school that make them more likely to struggle with achieving what we expect for them in reading and writing and language and literacy skills in schools. And that doesn't just mean students who are from race minority groups or students who are from language minority groups. It can mean that. In my talk, that's what I'm going to talk about, because those are the student groups I primarily do focus my research efforts on. But depending on the student and depending on the condition, when we talk about being vulnerable to experiencing difficulty in school, we're also talking about, for example, students with disabilities. We're also talking about, for example, students who are growing up in communities that are marginalized and don't perhaps have the resources that we would like for them to have to support what is happening in the family's homes, which would then support what is happening in schools. I am in particular talking about children who are growing up in poverty and low-income households. These are children for whom learning can be difficult for many reasons because poverty creates a sort of barrage of conditions that makes learning hard, let alone reading hard. Poverty can also be a very much so generational thing. So intergenerational poverty is at play too. If your family was struggling with their incomes in this generation, it's very likely that also happened in previous generations. And so that mattered to what was happening for children in this family over multiple generations. It also means that you're probably more likely to have a parent or a grandparent or others in your family who struggled with language and literacy in school as well. Now, whether or not they were assigned those categories as dyslexia or reading disability or learning disability or any other condition for that matter, it's not always the case, but they very likely had difficulty with reading and writing in school, and that may matter to how it is they're able to support reading and writing for their children. So then I talk about dyslexia and literacy in vulnerable and diverse student populations. It's important that we capture all of the complexity of what those words mean. They don't just mean poor, they don't just mean Black, they don't just mean English language learner, they mean a lot of things. And it's important to unpack those things as we think about this particular student group and supporting them. Now, we all know, and I'm sure I don't have to convince you, that our big problem, our shared problem, both as educators, as researchers, as families and parents and caregivers of our students, I think we all can agree that not enough children are reading and succeeding in schools. I'm showing you here on this slide the most recent data from the National Assessment of Education Progress. This is our nation's assessment that we give to students randomly across the nation every couple of years in multiple academic areas. Reading is just one. And we give them to them in grades 4 and 8, as well as other grades. And we look at the trends to determine how it is that students are doing in school. It's like a temperature check for us to see how things are going. And, you know, if there's a fever, then let's figure out what the cause of the fever is and how we might address that fever. That's how we should think about it. And so our temperature check tells us, if you notice, we've been giving the NAEP for many, many years. I've started my graph here in 1992, but we've been giving it for many years. And for all the years that we've been giving it, what you notice is that this red line, which are students, the average scaled score for 4th graders over time. Above this is the average scaled score for 8th graders over time. These green lines show us proficient. So that would be students performing at proficient levels. And what you see is, on average, students in the US in grades 4 and 8 have not been performing at proficient levels in reading. And that's been happening for quite some time. It certainly was happening when FCRR was founded in 2020. And it was still happening when COVID-19 hit us all, when we all had that shared experience where schooling was different. And parenting was different, and home and work and everything was different. And we're still learning about what COVID-19 meant for our children's learning as well as for their success in school. But the early evidence suggests that, and as you can see slightly with this line, right, the scores are going down. So our kids are more children on average are struggling with reading in school than they were before. But make no mistake about it, this is a challenge we've been facing for quite some time and working on for a very long time for all of our children. But when you start to look at subgroups of students, our students who are most vulnerable, you find that the stats are even more concerning. So if this is the NAEP reading scores for 4th graders in 2019, so pre-COVID, keep that in mind. On average, in 4th grade, only about 1/3 of our students were reading at proficient levels. But when you start to look by subgroup, you see, for example, only 1 in 2 white students, only 1 in 5 Black students, Hispanic students, students who are eligible for free and reduced lunch programs. That means that typically is an indicator we use that lets us know that children might be living in low-income households. So that's at 1 in 5, but look at our students with disabilities. Our students who are in school who are still gaining proficiency in the English language, so some of our bilingual and multilingual learners. we're at rates that are closer to 1 in 10. That's pretty shocking when you think about it, right? Imagine a classroom with about 20 students in it. And what you suddenly start to realize is that many children in that classroom are very likely struggling with reading in one way or another. That means all of us know a student who's struggling with reading very likely in one way or another. And so there's work we have to do to support our most vulnerable learners, including our students with disabilities. Yet, what's interesting in the world of special education in particular is you find that many students, in particular Black students, and these graphs, what I'm showing you, are African-American students in the red, Latino, Hispanic students in the blue, white students in the green. And this is a study that was done some time ago with data that's available from 2004 to 2008. Although I can tell you the trends are pretty stable. And what we find is that on average, African-American students and Hispanic students are misrepresented in special education. So for example, you find that for intellectual disabilities in this study, African-American students were 2.64 times more likely to be diagnosed with or eligible for services for intellectual disabilities, 2.29 times more likely for emotional behavioral disturbance, not so much for learning disabilities, which is quite interesting if so many of them are struggling with reading. And as you all know, learning disabilities are the category of disabilities for which students qualify for services to address many primary academic needs, like reading, like students who have dyslexia, for example. So it's quite interesting that despite their misrepresentation in special education, African-American students are less likely to be identified for academic services and receive special education services. So they're more likely to be performing more poorly, less likely to receive treatment for ineligibility for those services in schools. It's a little shocking, and there's some more recent evidence. This is a study by Paul Morgan, where he's looking at the likelihood of students to receive services, special education services in school, whether it be for learning disabilities or speech and language impairment. And what you find is African-American students, and then in fact also Latino and Hispanic students, are less likely to get those services. There seems to be a disconnect there. So why is that happening? Well, there are lots of reasons why. We have looked into the research to find out if so many African-American children are struggling with reading, then why are they less likely to be identified with reading disabilities or receive appropriate services? Well, maybe it's something going on in the school, right? We know that there are achievement disparities. Those achievement gaps that we often talk about are evident as early as we can test children. Often that's by preschool or age 3. And we can see achievement gaps even as young as age 3. And in some studies, we find that those gaps can grow over time. So the longer you're in school, the worse it can get. Often we find that Black African-American children, for example, are more likely to attend underfunded schools, under-resourced schools, schools that have less well-prepared teachers, schools that have lower quality of instruction. All of those challenges make it difficult for children to achieve in school for certain. So perhaps, yes, let's get better instruction. Let's get more resources in school. Maybe we would see that cause these changes. But we know that's not a sufficient causal factor in and of itself. If we address that, we still very likely would have these challenges. So maybe there are things happening in the family and at home. And certainly there are language barriers and cultural differences, and yes, even systematic racism that makes it so that families avoid disability identification. They are not comfortable with their children receiving diagnosis and treatment for disorders when they're already struggling to gain the most that they can from their educational experiences at home and at school. And that can create a barrier for families. We also know that even for those that choose to receive services and are able to get those services for them, they tend to live in marginalized and under-resourced communities with lots of families that are living at or below the poverty threshold. And poverty begets lots of challenges, negative consequences for reading achievement, things like stress and depression, things like unstable housing or a family history of academic difficulty with schooling, or less access to healthcare, less access to tutors and specialists and psychoeducational evaluations and other things that are necessary to support families in getting appropriate services for their schools. But even if we fix that, that still likely wouldn't solve our problem. And it's interesting because, as we know, and many of us can agree, that dyslexia and reading difficulties have a brain basis. Well, there's research, more recent research, that suggests that poverty is associated with differences in the brain structure, so that these young brains of our youngest learners are different and can move and grow and develop differently under conditions of stress that are associated with poverty. Now, what we also find is that through high quality, early explicit reading instruction that is really tailored to meet students' needs, the brain structure changes, right? And you all, I'm sure, have heard often, right? Brains were not born to read, right? Brains have to be taught to read. So if you can provide sufficient instruction and effective instruction for our students, those brains develop and they change. But poverty can make that difficult. Well, what about the law? Maybe it's the law and eligibility, this whole process by which we provide services for kids in the first place. Maybe that's the challenge here. And certainly, you have to think about the eligibility criteria for specific learning disabilities under which dyslexia and reading disabilities fall. And what those criteria tell us is that identification of children's learning problems cannot be due to inadequate learning opportunities, environmental factors, cultural differences, economic disadvantage. If those we think are the likely culprits, they make it challenging for you to receive eligibility for services. It's not quite clear yet how response to intervention processes have helped this. We are still learning about response to intervention and multi-tier support systems. What we're learning is that they can help this scenario, but what we're also learning is it's difficult to implement effective multi-tier support systems in school. But nonetheless, if procedures for identification are disproportionately unresponsive to specific student groups, then families have limited access and opportunities to benefit from services. They very likely will have undiagnosed or untreated disabilities, and that could be contributing to the achievement gap. And based on all that we just talked about, we know that African-American children are much more likely to have inadequate learning opportunities, much more likely to be growing up in environments that don't necessarily support learning, much more likely to be experiencing economic disadvantage. So already we have laws and eligibility processes in place that make it much more difficult for them to benefit. And then I have to say, the research is also a challenge for us here. There have been impressive advances in how it is that we understand how reading develops, how to assess reading, how to develop and deliver effective reading instruction, and even intervention when reading goes awry. We know much more about what we can do to support all of our learners with and without disabilities. But unfortunately, much of the research evidence that we have includes samples that don't have a lot of African-American children in them. Or for that matter, many other students from race and language and culturally different groups. Most of our studies don't have large samples of those children in them. And often when they do, race and income are conflated, making it difficult to discern what's happening and whether or not economic factors are at play here, or whether or not there are other factors at play here, or in fact, whether or not both are in play here. So it makes it difficult for us to figure out the mechanisms by which children do or do not learn to read, let alone how is it that we should respond to their learning difficulties. So with all of these challenges in play, of course, you want to know from your local neighborhood research expert, well, what should we do? Well, I think let's step back a little bit. And first, I want to ask you, let's start with what we want. I think we can agree that what we want is that all of our practitioners, teachers, clinicians, principals, policymakers, everyone who's charged with providing support and services to our students to make decisions about policies and practices and programs based upon verifiable evidence. We want them to make evidence-based decisions. And why not? Because when it comes to children, shouldn't be certain.
Can we even afford this house?
I'm pretty sure we can.
Pretty sure. With Rocket Mortgage, you can be certain. Not pretty sure.
What's the difference?
Let me show you. I'm pretty sure these aren't poisonous. I'm pretty sure these are parachutes.
Mine has a sandwich.
That's mine. I'm pretty sure you do not run. I'm pretty sure you could take Batista down.
You're on.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure this is trending.
I'm pretty sure these hornets aren't the murdering type. I'm pretty sure we can make it.
Certain is better.
Let's go with certain.
Good choice.
When you're buying a
Certain is better. Certain is better when it comes to our kids. I don't want you guessing. I don't want you thinking about whether or not something should or shouldn't be working for you. I want you to feel confident. I want you to know that you are making the best possible decision with the best information you have available on behalf of the children and the families that you serve. And so I want that too. So when I moved to Tallahassee, Florida, where Florida State is, and on my little map here, you can see this little emblem here, that's Florida State. And down here in the corner in this little green circle, that's my house. I live about 5 miles from door to door from my home to the university and where FCRR is. And these yellow boxes represent all of the elementary schools I pass by every single day on my way to work. And when I arrived here, the first thing I did was find out what was happening with reading in my local community, because I wanted to make sure that I was a part of the solution, right? And what I found, which is actually not surprising for many college towns and many places where there are universities, some of the lowest performing schools are in our backyard. So all of these schools are less than 5 miles from FCRR. And in Florida, we grade our schools. And so you see their school grades. These arrows represent going up or down. And thankfully, this is from 2019, I can tell you that most recent data suggests that all of these scores are going up, which is a wonderful thing. But at the time, we in some of our schools, we had as few as 30% of kids who were reading on grade level. And this was pre-COVID. So I, of course, coming in, reading rockstar researcher, I am going to solve this problem. I want to make sure that I bring all that I can to address reading in this space. But let's back up for a minute. Here I am. I look super cute in this particular GIF. It looks just like me, definitely. And here I am wanting to do the best I can for the schools in my local neighborhood, which feels like that they're on fire. And there's much to be done to make sure that their kids are reading and succeeding in schools. But what I have to step back and recognize is I'm not the only one there. There are lots of people here who are trying to do the best they can to support our kids. Some of them are doing things that may or may not be so effective. They help, they think they're helping, but they might not be the most effective technique that we can be using. Some of them are my colleagues at the university who I don't even know are in the building, and they don't know that I'm in the building, because we're all there at the same time, trying to do the best we can to help these schools. And what we're doing perhaps is maybe getting in the way of the professionals who are there. Because make no mistake about it, every single school is full of knowledgeable professionals who have been there every single day. And they were certainly there before I got there and have been doing what they can to support their kids. And then there's always this guy. There's always some guy who's just throwing stuff at it, right? Now, while we might be frustrated by this guy, perhaps we don't think he's doing the most evidence-based thing possible to support reading outcomes in our kids. You know what? He's been there. He's been there long before you were there, and he's gonna be there after you leave. And he has showed up for these kids and their families and their schools, and he's doing what he can to help. So all of us are here doing the best we can to try to make sure that reading is happening for all our learners in these schools. And we've yet to realize that and pay attention to that. The school didn't just catch fire all by itself. There's lots of things happening in this community, lots of things happening around this school that makes a difference to how well kids are reading and succeeding in it. much more than just whether or not evidence-based instruction is happening in the classroom. Doesn't mean evidence-based instruction isn't important, but it's certainly not the only thing that's making a difference to learning. So I want to step back and return to those words that matter so much. Again, I think we can agree. We're talking about dyslexia, neurologically based, language-related, unexpected difficulty learning to read. We're talking about literacy. We're talking about word reading and spelling difficulties, which also then lead to difficulty with advanced reading, writing, and language skills, and what we want for kids so that they become fully confident, proficient, literate adults in our society. And when we're talking about diverse and vulnerable learners, in particular, we're talking about kids from different race, cultural, linguistic minority groups, kids who are very likely growing up in marginalized and under-resourced communities, which make a difference to what resources are available in their families and homes, and make a difference to what they're able to do when they walk into the building and sit in your classroom. And if we can understand and agree with those terms, then I want to present some tough questions for you that might help us connect the dots. For example, who is missing from our preferred image of reading disabilities and dyslexia? And why are we leaving them out? Oftentimes, when we talk about, oftentimes, when we talk about dyslexia and reading disabilities, we are talking about increased advocacy for that population of students and adults, right? Because this is a lifelong condition. So you hear people talk about reading disabilities, dyslexia, as like it's a social justice movement, right? And it's a strengths-based approach that we're talking about individuals who are creative and they're out-of-the-box thinkers or precocious and imaginative. We're talking about how they think differently and that helps them solve problems differently. But I want to ask you, strengths for who? Justice for who? Who are we thinking about when we look at these popular images? And are we including our most diverse and vulnerable learners? Remember, if dyslexia includes these things like a brain basis, and we know that conditions like poverty affect the brain. If we're talking about that it's a common condition, but we're saying that, for example, 4 out of 5 African-American children are experiencing difficulty with reading in school. If we're saying dyslexia is heritable, but we know there's an intergenerational transmission of reading difficulty from generation to generation, whether you were or were not diagnosed and provided appropriate treatment and services for the disability. And we know that this is a condition that is lifelong, that is connected to language processing. And both of those things have implications for things like brain development, cultural differences, instructional supports, poverty. But the hallmark of this is unexpected difficulty learning to read. Well, just how unexpected is it? And can it be? Given what we have come to learn about reading and reading disabilities and dyslexia, I challenge us to ask, should this defining characteristic be a little bit more nuanced if we want to be more inclusive of all of our learners? Really simply put, can a learner be growing up in less than optimal conditions for learning at home or school? Have family members who struggled with reading difficulty all of their lives in school and in life? Can you be poor? Can you belong to a race or language or cultural minority group and still have dyslexia or a reading disability? For example, like these folks in this Headstrong Nation video. And let me tee it up for you. In the interest of time, I'm going to forward us a little bit.
Journeys through understanding. My ADHD means that I have trouble directing my attention and with quick recall of facts. Ben and I spend time mentoring young people who share our disabilities.
With my other 3 siblings, they've breezed through school so easily, and I'm sitting here struggling, so I'm like, am I that black sheep? Am I the one that's going to disgrace my family? Am I the one that's going to be left behind? Am I the one that everybody's going to say, you don't want to be like him?
Recently diagnosed, he was forced to leave his private school and transfer to a public school in Oakland because his ADHD made it so difficult for him to complete his schoolwork.
This perpetuates the cause of the problem, or I want to convey how I feel about a certain issue or circumstances. But if I can't spell convey or perpetuate, I'm gonna put, well, Well, because I did it, you know, so before I drop that power of that sentence, I'll go call somebody.
Renita grew up in the projects of Kansas City. A high school dropout and a single mother, she still managed to guide her 3 dyslexic children through school. She herself wasn't identified as dyslexic until she went back to school at her son Joe's urging. Joe's own dyslexia has limited his work options, but he's found his calling mentoring kids.
Okay, you need help? Come and talk to me. I have a disability. You can come talk to me. I have dyslexia like you. And they're like, whoa, coach, you're a teacher. How could you have dyslexia? I was like, it doesn't matter who you are or what you do. It's just something that you're born with and you can't change. You can only work with it.
I found out about Joe Stutz in law school. Working as a laborer, shoveling coal in the 1970s, the federal facility he worked for told him he could not become a heavy equipment operator because he could not read.
I walked up to that desk and told him that he thought there was something wrong with me. And when he said those words, you need to think about that, I just sort of melted inside and the anger come back. And that's when I started fighting.
He sued the federal government for discriminating against him as a dyslexic person, and he said,
So that's my question for you. Can all of these individuals, all of their stories, they don't typically fit into our preferred image of who has reading disabilities and dyslexia or ADHD or other conditions. And so when we talk about whether or not we want to ensure things like the science of reading for all learners, do we really mean all learners? Are we looking for vulnerable and diverse learners with reading disabilities and dyslexia? Are identification processes adequate? We talked a little bit about the law. Here's one example, and I'm going to take us to the other end of the exceptionality distribution, right? Because when we talk about special education, remember, we're not just talking about students who present with disabilities, we're also talking about students who present as gifted. And as some of you know, there's some intersectionality there and in between because there are gifted students with disabilities. In this particular study, there was a district where in the early 2000s, they didn't have a process for looking for, a child find process for looking for students who might qualify to receive talented and gifted services. But as soon as they started screening universally for students, look at how that number jumped. The schools in the district that started looking for kids who might be talented and gifted, well, shockingly enough, they found them. And as soon as they stopped looking, because there were budget cuts to the program, it went entirely the other way. And it should not be surprising to you, especially given the nature of our talk, that disproportionately the kids they found were disproportionately poor, Black, Hispanic, or parents who were not, who themselves were English learners. So oftentimes, maybe we're not looking for diverse and vulnerable students who could benefit from our special education services. So is this a problem of access and equity and disparity? And there's been a lot of conversation about those things these days. I would challenge us to think about remembering that all of these things are existing within a system, right? Education is a system. Many of these things that we're talking about are systems. And I'm back here in Tallahassee where I live. There's Florida State. There's my home. We have the Parkway as one of our main highway or byways that goes through. I-10 is one of our main highways that goes through. And what you have to remember is that systems are built. They exist in places. And so it's important to think about your place. And like any other system, there are multiple levers you can pull on to make things move in that system at the same time. So we're talking about these educational equities, but they're not the only inequities we might see. We see racial equities, health equities, economic equities. Those things are all tied to a place. So let's take, for example, housing, where I live in Tallahassee. It might be difficult to see, but what you might notice here is that there's a lot of blue dots up here, and there's a lot of green dots down here, and I got a little red pocket right here. Well, Tallahassee is pretty much very largely populated. The two largest race groups in Tallahassee are Black and white. And on the north side of the city, all these blue dots represent density for white members of our community. And these green dots represent Black individuals in our community. And you notice that they kind of line up with these major thoroughways that have been built in Tallahassee, right? Long time ago, years ago, these things were built. But they have consequences, right? And because there were actual public policies that divided us and decided where we did and didn't live, those actions made a difference to how we settled in our city, and they created separate and segregated communities, often those that have concentrated poverty on the south side and those that have concentrated wealth on the north side in our community. But that doesn't stop with housing, right? So let's take, for example, health. We would all agree that in order for children to learn best in school, they need to be healthy. The healthiest kids learn better. Well, where are all the hospitals in Tallahassee? What about nutrition? We would agree. Nutrition is a part of health as well. Kids who are well fed and who can come to school focused on their learning instead of focused on their hunger or other conditions that happen when you have poor nutrition. Well, where are all the grocery stores in Tallahassee? Income certainly we've talked about income as well. Again, darker means lower income. And on average, lower income houses are on the south side of Tallahassee compared to the north side of Tallahassee. And those things show up in our schools as well. And so I'm showing you a map of all of our elementary schools in Leon County, where Tallahassee is located. There's Florida State. We're right there in the middle again. Here's where I live. There are those thoroughways. So in our elementary schools, and I'm going to show you scores from 2019. So this is pre-COVID-19, important, pre-COVID-19. These red circles represent all the schools for where more than 50% of students were not passing the state reading test in 3rd grade. And these black circles represent the schools where there were more than 15% of students had IEPs to address disabilities in their schooling. And we know that the overwhelming majority of students for whom they're receiving IEP services for a disability often struggle with language and literacy, reading and writing. And these yellow dots represent the schools for which more than 50% of students were performing below school readiness benchmark at school entry in 2019. So these are schools where more than half of the students in the classroom weren't ready to benefit from formal reading instruction in school based on their performance on those scores. Notice where all the dots are. And notice where there's multiple dots, multiple challenges happening at the same time. So in my community, if I want to address what is happening with reading disabilities, what is happening with dyslexia, what is happening even with typical reading development, ensuring that the science of reading is available for all children, I'm going to have to pay attention to lots of different factors. And it's not a mistake or happenstance that multiple vulnerabilities exist on the South Side. Now, it's important to keep in mind that this narrative and this story is not about blame. I certainly wasn't in Tallahassee when the Parkway was built, and very many people who live here today and many people I work with who are doing all we can to support our children and families and communities weren't there either. We weren't at that meeting, right? Because these things that are happening are much bigger than one individual and one individual solution, right? So this is not a question about blame or fault. This is a question about responsibility. I believe that we are responsible to all the children in our community that we serve. And so I am trying to do the best to make sure that we get reading to all of them. And my question for you is, what does it look like where you live? So this is where Landmark is. We know it's a private independent school. I know you have kids who are at Landmark, some residential students who are from all over, right? But what's it look like in your community? And when we talk about whether or not we're going to make sure all of our children are reading and succeeding in schools, what are the things that we can do where we live to support that and make that happen? So what's the one thing you should do? People always ask you, what's the one thing you should do? I really, really, really hate that question. And many people have heard me say that before. But the reason I hate that question is because, quite simply, if it was just one thing, you're smart, I'm smart, I know Josh is smart. All of our parents are smart. Our kiddos are brilliant. Don't you think if it was just one thing, we'd be doing it by now? It clearly is a lot of things happening at the same time that we've got to attend to make sure that all our learners are reading and succeeding in school. So I'm going to leave you with 4 ideas, things that I think you can work on to help make this happen in your space, in your community. The first, of course, is take a comprehensive approach. And I hope I've made that quite clear for you. This is me and my 3 kiddos, right? I've got a 17-year-old, a 14-year-old, and an 8-year-old. So I've got them spread out all the way from K to 12. And where I live, I think about what I can do to support reading in all learners where I live. That means I don't think about reading as just being everything. It's just one thing. And it's really difficult, I think, for us in particular, this group who I know who's in the room with me, because we're so passionate about reading, because it in many ways is the primary challenge that so many of the children that we love, it's the thing they struggle with the most. Or even for us ourselves, it's the thing we struggle with the most. And so we get so laser focused on it because we've got to do something to make sure reading is happening for every student. But what I hope I'm helping you see, and hopefully maybe we can agree, is if we want reading to happen for all our kids, it's just one of the things we've got to address for all of our kids. In other words, what if you took Scarborough's rope, which we all love so dearly, and put it on the back of this little girl's head? Side story, really funny story about me. Hollis Scarborough is a dear friend of mine, and I did my postdoc work with her. And I worked with her for many, 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 many years. And I referred to this braid many, 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 many years. I referred to as a braid. I talked about Scarborough's reading braid. And one day she finally came to me and said, you know, it's a rope. And I was first embarrassed that I didn't realize that this person who I so revered, it was always a rope. But she, in her schema, her background, she spent a lot of time on the coast. And so she thought about sailing. And that's why this looked like a rope for her. But I thought about the back of my little girl's hair and the braids that I would be braiding in her hair. And so I always thought about it as a braid. And so this is my schema when I think about this. What if you drop Scarborough's rope/braid on top of this little girl's head and thought about all the things that are necessary for this whole person to learn and all the challenges that might be in play, right? Opportunities and challenges, early childhood education and opportunity, families and opportunity, peers and opportunity. But there might also be other things that are challenges. Toxic stress could be a challenge. Trauma that our children experience could be a challenge. And it makes a difference to how well they show up for learning. And we want to think about that while we're also attending to all the things we need for them to be good readers. I also think we should center equity in our work. Now, this has been a challenge often, and currently it's a big challenge right now, and center stage for many of us in the work that we do as we start to transition from this notion of equality to equity, where equality really is about everybody getting the same thing, and equity is really about making sure that everyone has what they need. And I'm sure you all have seen this graphic going around the internet. It makes a reappearance every several years. And what you see, of course, on the left-hand side is these 3 individuals being able to watch this baseball game. If they all have the same box, then they're not all going to benefit from this experience the same. But if we provide them with what they need, they all can benefit from this experience. And while on the surface, we think about that as sort of individual decision-making, right? It's important to keep in mind that equity is a systems thing. It's not just about you and your individual choices. It really is about us and what we want to do to make sure that all our kids are reading and succeeding in school. So for example, when I see this picture, the questions I ask are, who put those boxes there? Who moved them on the right-hand side? Why is there a fence there? Who put the fence up? Maybe we just don't need a fence anymore. Why in the world are they watching baseball? I have to say, I'm a Southern girl at heart. I want to watch football. I was born and raised in the South, and then I went to school in the Midwest. I just want to watch football. But who decided we were watching baseball, right? All of those things are much more about our collective than they are about our individual decisions. Yes, our individual decisions matter, but our collective matters too. And there's power in our collective, because what we want to make sure is that all of our kids are thriving in school and in life. And what we know for sure is that all of our kids are not. So these are just, for example, 2 articles, one in the New York Times, another is a package of stories that were actually published in the Washington Post by Sarah Carr recently. On the left-hand side, we've got students in Detroit whose families had to go to court to secure the right to evidence-based reading instruction for their kids, because it was an actual legitimate question as to whether or not they have this right, whether or not children have the right to receive the best literacy instruction they can in their schools. So we've got groups of parents here and advocates as well who have to fight for what we may take for granted as very basic rights. And you're not looking at a typo, this is 2020. Meanwhile, we've got parents of students who have reading difficulties and dyslexia who fight to receive appropriate treatment for their kids in school, who fight for eligibility processes, fight to find psychoeducation evaluations, fight to find therapists, and just appropriate identification and eligibility for services in school that have nothing to do with whether or not your child has a behavior problem, a presumed behavior issue, or nothing to do with whether or not your child has a presumed intellectual difficulty. But no, my child just has difficulty with reading, which might then be dyslexia if you go look for it. Those issues happen all over our nation, and they're absolutely issues of equity, but that means they're also issues that we can address. We can make sure all these kids are thriving. But it does mean that we can't do this by ourselves. So this is Ghostbusters, original Ghostbusters, so I'm dating myself here, but the original Ghostbusters, Dr. Ian Spengler said in one quote, when they're about to fight the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, he said, there's something I forgot to tell you. It's very important that you don't cross the streams. It would be bad if you cross the streams. Try to imagine all life as you know it stopping instantaneously and every molecule in your body exploding at the speed of light. That is often what partnership feels like. It's what it feels like when we try to work together on these big, huge issues, like making sure all kids are reading and succeeding in school. And it can be really, really hard. But when we're talking about our most vulnerable learners, and that includes our children with dyslexia and reading disabilities, partnership isn't just a value, it's a tool. It's something we have to use if we expect to make meaningful, lasting change for our kiddos. That means that partnerships are not a luxury, and they're often going to have to be cross-sector partnerships. I need my education folks working with my social workers, working with my clinicians, working with other providers. I need in-school and after-school providers working together. I need parents and families at the table as well, right? I need my medical professionals at the table as well. You all know this for the children and families that you serve. They often require support from multiple different providers, multiple different audiences, multiple different office visits you're making to ensure the best educational experience for our kids. That's true for all of our kids. That means we need a collective approach. And collective impact is one way of thinking about that approach. It's an approach to structuring your collaboration to solve complex problems. What you find when partners agree to work together in that way is that they have a common agenda, shared measurement and outcomes, and aligned efforts. And all of that is facilitated by a structure, a backbone organization that keeps everybody moving in the same direction. Parents are very strong advocates for their kids. We've seen a lot recently with parents who have really pushed a lot forward as it relates to the science of reading and how children are receiving supports and services in schools. They are taking a collective approach to making that happen. Absolutely. And it's one of the reasons why it's so powerful. So what you have to ask yourself is how your efforts are aligned to what we expect to see in the classroom and in schools for all of our kids. And that means you've got to listen and you've got to learn and you've got to engage across the aisle, so to speak, right? We often feel like we're talking across each other And some of us are yelling about, you must do this because this is the science, and others are yelling saying, well, maybe not so much, I don't know. And we think it's because maybe they don't understand, maybe they don't know, maybe they don't value it. But really, science is tough. Science is tricky to talk about. It's not an easy thing for everyone to understand. It's always nuanced and complex. It's always evolving here. And there are often a lot of people talking about it at the same time. And so you can feel like you're the who's here with Horton, where you just are yelling like, please listen, listen, listen. So people will listen to us, when really it's not an issue of people not hearing you. But listening requires a little different kind of communication, right? It cannot make the assumption that we don't all want the same thing for our kids. In fact, we do. That's one thing we often agree on. And it really is about making sure we can wade through our differences and learn how to communicate well with each other to share and exchange information so that we can find common ground. And that's true for our families, but it's true for our educators, and it's true for us as researchers too. And we need to be careful when we ask our children and families and our vulnerable communities to join that team, because you have to ask, who set the priorities for whatever it is we're talking about, who decided, and who will benefit. We often come to the table thinking that we're there to serve communities who we never asked what they wanted in the first place. We never asked what their needs were and how we could best show up for them. So we have to remember that and keep in mind that if we care about this science and care about getting it to all of our kids, we not only have to care about how it gets made, but we also have to care about how it is that we implement it for the benefit of those children and communities. Finally, I think I want to make sure we agree that we insist that all kids can learn. Now, this is something that you might think, well, we advocate for students with disabilities. So of course, we're always here at the table making sure that everyone understands that my student, even students with disabilities, can learn. But there's ample research evidence to suggest that we don't all agree on that. We as families and parents and caregivers, we as educators, we as researchers, we vary in that assumption. So we have to agree and come to the table and wrestle with our own biases around whether or not we really believe that all of our children are capable of learning and succeeding in school. And certainly, as this is a quote from Ronald Edmonds that reminds us that this is really about, again, our shared responsibility, that we can choose to successfully teach all children whose schooling is of interest to us. And we know a lot about how to make that happen. So whether or not we do it really depends on how we feel about the fact that we haven't so far and what we're willing to do to turn the tide. So as you think about this, I hope I've given you lots of things to think about as you consider what's happening with children and families in your communities, children and families in your schools, and how it is that we make sure that all of our kids, even our vulnerable and diverse learners, are reading and succeeding in school. But as you think about how you want to play in this story and what it is that your responsibility is, remember, I implore you to remember, this is not a story about going into communities and saving poor children in failing schools. This really is about the choices that we make on behalf of our children and our families. Because if you choose to look, it's not hard to see that there are phenomenal leaders, amazing teachers, families, innovative staff, eager kids, people who are here, who are talented, who are caring, and who are invested in our kids. They've been there all along, and they're more than willing to do more to support our kids. It is not our job to save them. It's our job to respect them, lift them up, honor them, tell their stories, and work alongside them to make sure that their kids are reading and succeeding too. I'm going to leave you with, you all will have access to these slides, and I'm going to leave you with two pieces, two issues of perspectives on language and literacy. One was published in spring 2020, the other in October 2022, where my colleagues and I tried to tackle some of these challenges and issues associated with making sure that we're delivering on the science of reading for all of our learners, in particular, diverse and vulnerable learners. So there's more there for you to learn. And as you continue to learn, I hope you continue to invite me along on this journey with you. I hope you enjoyed this time, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you so much.
Nicole, first I have to start by saying thank you. That was phenomenal. That was inspiring. I've had the great privilege of hearing Nicole speak many times, and every time you make me think. And there's many very smart people who I respect, who I hear them talk, and I don't think because I have no idea what they're talking about. So you just make very complex ideas and situations very accessible. So thank you for that. So we have a few questions that came in, and then I want to pick your brain a little bit. But one of the questions that someone posed was around if we were to take what we know about the science of reading, and obviously that's a complex statement unto itself, but if we were to take what we know and apply it in schools more widely, consistently, with more efficacy, would we, in theory, not only see higher rates of literacy, but would we see lower rates of disability? Would we actually find that there would be kids that would not qualify because they would have never gotten to a point where there was that discrepancy?
Yeah. First, thank you for saying that I made you think. I appreciate that. Maybe that's the professor in me, but I love that. So I'm sure you're not going to be surprised that I'm going to say I don't think it's that simple. But I do think what the tension there is really between what's difficult about special education in particular, and even for students with dyslexia and reading disabilities, is you've got diagnosis of a disability and you've got eligibility for services in schools. And those are not the same thing, right? So eligibility for services in schools, which are protected under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. There are certain provisions within that act that allow for students to be eligible to receive additional supports and services in schools to perform at expected levels in school. That, quite honestly, differs. It differs by school, it differs by district, it differs by state, by what is expectation for what is performing at an expected level, right? And in fact, as we have learned and understood more about things like reading, language, and literacy, our expectations change for what we want to see third graders do or kindergartners do. They change over time. And so as those changes happen, what it is that we determine allows you to be eligible to receive services in school is very different than receiving a psychoeducation evaluation for eligibility or diagnosis, I should say, for diagnosis and treatment of a disability. So I'm not sure that if we made sure that all teachers were teaching according to what we commonly think of as a science of reading, that we would see fewer students receiving eligibility for services or fewer students receiving diagnosis of a disability. I do think, however, we might see more students receiving the kind of instruction and supports they need to achieve in school, no matter which route we're talking about, right? If we increase the likelihood that students are receiving evidence-based instruction in their classrooms all day, every day, and that translates to evidence-based practices, policies, and programs that are happening in schools all day, every day. And that translates into the types of things we ask families to do at homes with their kids to support their kids' learning outside of school time each and every day. If we increase the likelihood that kids can't help but fall into evidence-based interactions and instruction with peers and adults and others in their environment, then they're more likely to get what they need, even if they are a student with a disability or a student with a disability who is not receiving services, or a student with disability who is receiving services, right? Those things that process in and of itself gets a little tricky to manage.
That's super helpful. And I will say, being a Southern boy myself, and to PS, nobody cares about college football up here. It's really weird, super weird.
We shall not talk about Tom Brady in this discussion. Sorry.
But it's been fascinating to me coming from the South to the Northeast, to your point about what qualifies for eligibility and also just the route to disability, to that diagnosis, is almost radically different here. In ways it's more accessible, in ways it's more arduous, because there is a much higher likelihood of litigation. There's much, it's fascinating to me. It's fascinating. And again, as you know, from our time together in Atlanta, it was a very different fight and somewhat of a fruitless fight. So that's a really helpful way to think about it, because I think you just answered my question, which was, at what point does it stop mattering? At what point do we I don't want to say we waste time, but if a kid's struggling, at what point do we bypass diagnosis and just go straight to intervention?
Oh, you have all the hard questions. You know, I think it depends. I think if we're talking about school-based settings, so I'm not in out of school medical settings or private settings where folks are getting psychoed evaluations, right? So they've got that DSM, the diagnostic criteria, which I know is gold. So I don't want to minimize the impact of having that. In particular, let's not think about, let's take it away from thinking about a parent, but as an individual with a disability, because kids with disabilities grow up, and like everything else that happens to you in your health, you want to know. And I have plenty of adult friends who were diagnosed with ADHD in adulthood, right? Or diagnosed with dyslexia in adulthood, and how it just completely changed what they understood about their lives and their experiences, and how much made sense now because they understood something, they unlocked something about themselves they didn't know. So I don't want to minimize that, right? But I think that when we're talking about making decisions for kids in schools to make sure that they are getting appropriate instruction and supports and services, whether that is or isn't intervention, I don't know that diagnosis is as important as eligibility for services. It's making sure, and it really is, ideally, if you can get that multi-tier system of support working, right, then that means you're screening all kids, and you're catching kids before they fail, right? No matter where you catch them. If you catch them on day 1 in kindergarten, or you catch them on day 60 in 5th grade after they've been to 5 different schools, it doesn't matter. When you catch them, you can provide support and services for them. And if we've got really good multi-tier support systems working in multiple schools, then it doesn't matter so much if they move either, right? If kids move, that information comes with them. So I don't have to start at ground zero where parents have to yet again make a case for why it is that they know their child has been struggling for the last several years because they've entered into a new school. But they bring all of that evidence, all of that data with them that you can use in a school-based setting to make an evidence-based decision around what kinds of supports and services kids might need. And then in any good MTSS system, you monitor that. You start, you don't stop and wait and see, you start. And you start and monitor. And if it's working, if kids are responding, you know how to move in your next direction, right? I think that becomes, for me, I don't think, it's not that I don't think eligibility or even diagnosis is unimportant, but the priority is to make sure you don't stop, that we're constantly responding to students' needs and moving if we need to, changing what we do if we need to better respond to children's needs.
That's super. That is such a great point. And your point too about not minimizing diagnosis. I'm a big proponent of that, but at the same time, I'm also like, well, these kids need it, let's just move on. But it's a privilege that all deserve, right? It's not, I get to know because my parents could afford it, or because what X, Y, and Z. You just, that's such great. And we got to go. But I also love, I think it's so helpful too for you, the fact that you have to emphasize that we shouldn't stop, that, that alone, right? I think for some folks, participants on the call right now, that's a depressing reality. And what I would love to close our time with, that I think is so important, that was really my biggest aha from you and from Julie Washington, was this idea that you're almost not allowed to be dyslexic and poor by the way the system itself, IDA for the longest time included, right? That in its own
exclusionary.
And that was revolutionary and mind-blowing to me, right? That's just, and to your point, it's genetic. So chances are, if you're not given opportunities, and then you kind of have
Mhm.
a cycle that your life is defined by, your opportunities are limited by the fact that you didn't, weren't able to achieve.
Mhm.
Anyway, yeah,
Yeah, I think it's and I have evolved in my understanding and thinking about this too, right? I was a special education teacher in 2000, early 2000s, and thinking about things very much on the way the IDEA was written at that time and evolving in my understanding. I think sometimes that can be scary, not just for us as researchers, because I do think there's bravery in research and challenging what you think you know and being brave enough to maybe find out that you didn't know what you thought you knew. The same is true for educators, and the same is true for families, right? And so it is a little jarring, a little off-putting to say, well, if reading disabilities and dyslexia have a brain basis, and the brain is different from a very early age based on the conditions in which that brain is growing, then how are you going to say this isn't dyslexia, right? Versus someone who's not growing up in those conditions, presenting in a very similar way, maybe that's dyslexia too. And it's a human thing. There's actually research on this. There's a human thing in this where oftentimes those who have will feel as though if you open that table up, you make it more inclusive, that somehow you'll pull away. You'll pull supports and services from them to give more to everyone else. And it feels threatening, especially because it's often a very hard-fought battle to get what you have for all of our families. It's a very hard-fought battle to get the support and services they need for their kids, and you can't diminish that. So it can cause you to sort of, huddle and say, please don't take away what I fought so hard for. But I do challenge us in this community to really think about this notion of who is not at this table, and why aren't they at this table, and what would happen if we opened it up and made sure that when we say all, we really do mean all, and that's going to take us some time. We didn't get here overnight. We're not going to get out of here overnight. But if we're all working in that direction, I think we can make sure that more kids are getting what they need.
Well, that is motivating, depressing, and exciting all at the same time. So thank you so much. It is always such an honor to have you. So thank you for being our inaugural researcher, and hopefully this will be the first of many. Thanks to everybody who was able to attend. I'm going to quickly plug our next Landmark Learns series, which is on April 25th, Tuesday, April 25th. We are going to be amongst a segment of Landmark's own faculty talking about using the science of reading to develop reading comprehension. I know. No, Nicole. And I'm glad it's not till April, so we have plenty of time for people to forget about this, so we don't have comparison points. But thank you all for being with us. Thank you so much, Nicole, for sharing this with us and inspiring us and motivating us all. And we'll send out a video of all this. And thank you all, and have a great night.
Good night, everybody. Thanks for having me.